So when we start talking about picking keywords and looking at them, start with the intent. One of my favorite things to do is ask new clients what keywords they want to rank for, and they'll start listing off some random keywords. And sometimes I'll call them like the CEO keywords or the gold keywords or the keywords that they care about, even though they might not drive revenue. And it's always funny to look at those keywords in their PPC and see lots and lots of clicks, lots of impressions, and no ROI. Because that's the keyword that they've decided and dictated that we need to go after this keyword, even though it has nothing to do with it, has nothing to do with the intent of who their real prospect is. So whenever I start looking at a new client, new project that I'm working on, I start with the intent and start trying to figure out what kind of content is there, what kind of content can I produce. So one of the examples I have here is like best video editing software. If you are a maker of video editing software, who shows up? What kind of content shows up for best video editing software? Adobe and I think WeVideo, who I've never heard of, are the only two. Everything else is some sort of publication. So really, there's 10 spots maybe a couple more. I have 2 opportunities if I'm a maker of video software for that keyword. Do I really want to go for that keyword? Is the intent there? People are looking to compare. Unless I have a compare page, maybe not the best kind of content, best keyword for me. The next one would be, what is video editing software? As a maker of video editing software, yes. If someone is super new, I want to get them in. I want to get my brand in front of them. You know, you can do display. You can do all sorts of other things for brand awareness. If they keep seeing me show up and I can explain exactly what video editing software is and show them screenshots of our product to show how easy it is, suddenly they'll be like, oh yeah, I can do that. Oh, look, a free trial, great. So again, looking at the intent, looking at where kind of content you have. And you'll also notice that there's videos on this example. So depending on the type of content you can produce videos to show people what a video editing software is. Oh, guess what? You can use your own product. And then just like review. People look for pricing, reviews, modifiers. I know I've worked in the auto space before. We used to have a lot of people searching for Ford Mustang GT pictures. Guess what the conversion rate for those keywords was for us as a lead generating? 0. It was people just trying to find pictures and download them for free. They were never going to buy a car. They weren't going to get a price quote. They were just tire kickers, just using up our bandwidth. So for me, I almost wanted to de-optimize for those types of keywords. When you start thinking about it, the who, what, where, Daniel's over here, he just stepped out, but he works with a lot of pizza places. Pizza near me, you know, if you're in Allen Park, if you're in downtown Detroit, I'm from Chicago, so we have different pizza places. I want, you know, deep dish pizza near me, Detroit. It's a lot of different modifiers. Who's going to show up? Think about the kinds of content, the best, which we just kind of used, guide, reviews, the different types of software. I know there's a SaaS solution in here. When you start thinking about comparing, it's called kind of brand jacking, but you can also just compare if you're a small startup. One of my favorite things to do until you get a letter from their lawyer, which we did, and then we complied, was to compare our software to theirs, because we beat them in everything. We beat them in price, we beat them in customer service, we beat them in features, we beat them in everything. And they didn't like it that one of our ratings for them was 2 months old. So that was all they could do, because legally we were okay. We just had to modify that little star on it. But anytime you compared us versus them, our page showed up #1, and it was a long list of why you should pick us over them. That page converted really well. Think about what problems people have. What problems do you solve? What are those keywords? And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but also, so who here has a chunky cat? I have a really chunky cat. My wife loves that cat. Weight control food is something that we would search for. We also had 2 really, really old cats recently who had very sensitive digestion, very sensitive. The number of types of cat and dog food that are out there, if you did not know, are ridiculous. You know, if you're shopping at Best Buy or for a computer, the different modifiers, the things that people want a gaming PC, they want a business PC. What are those modifiers that people can be searching for? And how can you align your content, align your articles along your blog posts, feature pages? How can you align with that? I think this was from Puma, but Macy's, any sort of shopping site will have all of these different things that can modify it. I once worked with a startup in the furniture space, and they sold rugs. And you could get a 5x5 brown shag like rug, or you could get a shag brown 5x5. Like they had it so that they created new pages for things. So they had it a little bit too much. So there's also that technical SEO, and I think Elmer will talk about that tomorrow, actually. You don't have to create. Long ago, SEO, I spent every day going, please, can I have budget for content? Please, can we produce content? Please, can I produce lots and lots of content? I need to have a page for every keyword. We don't have to do that anymore. If you go into your Google Search Console and you can find that you have thousands of keywords for a single page that rank. There's just different variations, different modifiers, thousands and thousands of keywords, one page can rank for. So you don't have to create 5,000 pages for 5,000 keywords. You might only have to create 5, maybe 10. So it just depends. Look and see how those align. This is also one of my favorite examples. So I try to tell people not to go too deep into looking at the modifiers a little bit, but car versus auto. I've had this argument with an auto client, and when I worked with a large insurance client. You're shaking your head. You have what? Yeah. We're currently in Detroit. I'm from Chicago, where we wear gym shoes. We don't wear tennis shoes. But it's amazing how people search. There are regional modifiers. Now, we don't think about it when we're doing keyword research. You think, oh no, the Brits over there, they talk about, the boot. No, that's a trunk. It depends on where you're from. But there's also what I've learned, truck versus semi versus 18-wheeler. Depending on where you are in the US, people call it different. There's also tractor trailer, which is not even on this list. So there's regional differences depending on where you're doing keyword research for. Keep those in mind. Sometimes Google will show the same pages, sometimes they won't. You just have to go and take a look at the SERPs as we were just doing. So picking keywords for internal review, one of my favorite things to do, honestly, is listen to sales calls. If you have salespeople, please, 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 please listen to the sales calls. What is your prospect asking about? What content is missing from the site? What content has confused them? You might not even need to produce new content and do keyword research. They might be answering the questions right there, which will save you a lot. Listen to customer service calls. If you can help as an SEO, part of what we would do is try to sell reducing customer service calls for our clients. When you're talking about a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 who really doesn't want people calling in at all, anything we could do to make it so that our support content was found and readily available and answer questions is a huge win. So anytime you can do that, look at ways to listen to your customer support. What are also people calling it? Are they calling your product and your features the same thing you do? If they're calling it something different on the phone, that's probably how they would search too. Talk to clients, prospects, CRM notes. If you have like a Salesforce type CRM, see if you can export those or get transcripts even, and just kind of throw that into different tools and start grouping it, looking for common occurrences that you don't think about. Who here looks at their site search reports? You do? Very few people ever do. You can set it up in Google Analytics and have your site, especially if you're on WordPress, it's really easy. It's just the S. And or if you're an e-commerce site, you really should be using it. But take a look and see what people are searching for. That's usually, they landed on a page, didn't find what they wanted, went to your search bar and did a search. Your page did not answer that question. If you see a lot of the same searches, look and see what page you possibly have that aligned with it and that wasn't answering the question. There's your keyword research right there. Please, please, please look at your paid data. A lot of times SEO people, writers don't think to look and ask the paid side of the house. There's those two teams, depending on the size of the company, actually don't even know the other exists really. They don't talk. So go and look and ask for the search. Oh, they just changed the name. It's basically a search query report. You want to know exactly what keywords people search for, not the keyword that was bid on. And take a look at it for the last year. And then compare it, which I like to do, against your Google Search Console data and see what aligns. Where do you rank well in SEO that you spend a lot of money in PPC? And start to look for where can we reduce spend or move spend. Also, what converts in PPC that we don't have any impressions for in SEO. Right there, that answers your question of what keywords and what content you need to produce. You have to look at no third-party tools. You have the data right there. And lastly, testimonials reviews on third-party sites. So if you're a SaaS solution, look at GetApp, G2. If you're like a hotel, you would look at TripAdvisor, Booking.com. Look at those type of aggregator sites in your industry. What do people talk about? What keywords do they mention? You can scrape the content, take a look at it, and see, do they always talk about the customer service? What features do they say? What keywords do they talk about? So one of the things I start, before I even start keyword research, is I do, there's different names for it, keyword assignment, brand assignment. I take a look at our Google Search Console data, and I try to understand what keywords these pages are ranking for according to Google. What has the most clicks, what has the most impressions? And sometimes I'll figure out that there's keywords that we've got a lot of impressions for, but we just don't rank on page 1 for it, and we already have content for it. So rather than writing new content, it helps me identify what content needs to be optimized. And so here then I can flip it around and I start to look at what keywords, and there's also cannibalization. So 1, 2, 3, 4, is that 6 down? More here keyword. I had to switch it, sorry, it's for my client. But that one actually was showing up for 3 or 4 pages. Well, what was that keyword? Is it because it's the home page and maybe a product page? Or which pages is it showing up? But there was another one down the list too that was showing up for multiple times. Is that because we've over-optimized certain pages? We're just cannibalizing ourselves? Do we have duplicate blog posts that are just too similar? And for me, that kind of answers some of the questions before I do keyword research, before we start producing new content. I like to look at the content that's already been written and figure out, can we reuse it? Can we optimize it? It's a bit backwards, but if you were to go food shopping for a party for Thanksgiving, do you just go and buy everything? Or do you go in the cupboards, the pantry, figure out what you have in the house first? And that's kind of how I look at this. I'm like, before I do keyword research, before I start suggesting new content to write, let's see what we have. Let's see what's past date. Let's see what's still good. And then we'll go and figure out what we need to fill in the blanks with. So Answer the Public is a great tool. If you start asking about what questions people might ask, Google's people also ask. Anytime you do a search, it'll show it there, or at the very bottom of the page, Google will show you things that people also search for. Sometimes it's your competitors, sometimes it's you. So it's always interesting. What problems do prospects have? Just again, reading your competitors, and then I already kind of talked about the versus comparing, Airbus versus Boeing. So there's a lot of tools out there that you can kind of take a look at that I start to like to ask questions for. Be wary though, some of these like Quora, Yahoo Answers is now gone. That used to just be a horrible mess. Reddit, sometimes I would suggest, sometimes depending on your space, don't go there for your space. There will be no help there. Sometimes there actually is some helpful stuff, and sometimes you'll see which competitors are spamming, which I just realized. I have a law client in, I won't say which city, but I realized that there was another lawyer that we were looking at that is just spamming Reddit every week with their blog content. It's like, wow, really? But like look in different groups and forums. I'll talk about in podcasting, one of the best places to look for ideas and what people are doing for podcasting, or who's coming up with ideas. If you want, do some link building, go into podcasting groups and look for who's looking for guests on their podcast. And you can figure out what different topics that people are talking about, but also you can then usually get a link from them. Quora, Wikipedia, any of those places are all great tools. Another thing I've started to do every so often when it makes sense is when I have a competitor that has a very interesting, very extensive blog, and they really love to name all of their blog titles the exact title, like the URL is the exact title. I just go to their post sitemap, because they're usually on WordPress, and scrape that sitemap, replace all of the dashes with spaces, and you now have a list of every blog post they have on their website, and then you can reverse engineer which keywords and which topics you do or do not have. I've used that for some of my competitors, for some of my clients that were starting podcasts or were looking for podcast ideas, and even just blog post ideas. I do the same thing. It's like, well, we already have 50 topics, but they have 150. Let me go see what they're doing, what makes sense for my business. Then I reverse it and throw the keywords, the topics, and some of the pages maybe into a certain tool, and I start to look for ideas. But it's a new, excuse me. But not trying to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes you can take a look at what they're doing and spin it to a different way. And I actually just did that for one of my clients this last week, where they needed 2 more topic ideas. And so I started looking at different tools. SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz all have different kind of third-party data. And I started looking at these 3 blog posts that really made sense for our client, but with a small spin on it to meet them in their market. And there was keywords, and I found everything, and it saved me probably 15 to 30 minutes of trying to figure out a new topic. So there's usually one person that knows this show, bless your heart, because my wife used to watch it all the time, and I would always catch it, so I actually know who Dan is. Does anyone know who Dan is? Judgy Dan? 1? Yes. 2, 3? All right. Judgy Dan is judging how you pick your keywords, is kind of what he's doing. I like to look at the current rankings for us. I also look at our competitors' rankings. I will take a look and do dumps from third-party tools of our competitors and look for common keywords that we rank for and maybe not as high, or maybe keywords look for the gaps and go, well, do we have that feature? Do we do that? Does that make sense for this client? Does this make sense for us? However we want to look at it and see what opportunities are there. Types of content in the search engines, depending on the keywords, the search volume, third party, all of your internal data. But then also like what the funnel is, where in the funnel is it? Is it high, low? What are our goals? Am I being told that, we need to hit 1,000 leads this month and we're only at 800, so I need to make sure that next month I'm focused more on, even if it's just small conversion numbers, not the, higher up. And then also looking at just like top 10 competitors and the one thing I'll say is whenever you're looking at Google, Bing, or whatever in the search engine results, don't look at every site for some keywords. And I just had this discussion with a client 2 months ago because we fell from number 1 to 3 for like 25 different keywords. But for each of them, it wasn't a competitor. Google had just changed what was showing up. Instead of showing them and other brands, it started showing aggregators, like those best of. So they moved down 2, but all of their competitors moved down 2. And there's really nothing we can do. We were still destroying all of their competitors, but Google had just decided that to serve the user better, a single entity solution is not the best result. So again, look at that type of intent, look at the SERP, and then also think about your goals. Is this long tail? Is it short tail? Head of the term or head of the search, and just try to figure out where that fits in. Also depends on your budget and how much content you can produce. So some tools that I like to use. I already talked about Quora, Reddit, again, also Twitter with, careful sometimes. Pinterest, depending on your space, is often interesting. You can find interesting infographics, memes, and all sorts of different ideas. Sometimes it might not make sense for you. I use sour beer as an example, and I was kind of impressed that when I did, I think this was Answer the Public, that how well Dogfish Head is optimized for sour beer. They just have the one sequence ale. It's pretty good, but I didn't realize that they optimized so well for it. This tool here is an interesting one. SEMrush has what they call cards. There's different ways that they visualize the ideas and the topics. And it kind of gives you then some of the posts that are doing really well according to them. This is Google Search Console. If you don't have it set up on all of your sites, please do. Same thing with Bing Webmaster. Most people do not have Bing Webmaster set up. Please set it up. They give you a ton of link data. They give you competitor link data, but they also give you all the keywords that people are searching for on Bing. And depending on your market and who you're going for, sometimes they might be searching a little bit differently than they do on Google. And then there's just, the Google Suggests, Google Trends, people also ask type stuff. The Google Search Console, I already talked about how you sometimes have thousands of keywords for a single page that you just can't get it in Google. You have to use their API. So there's a bunch of tools out there. Analytics Edge is one I've used in the past. I currently use Seo Tools for Excel, and it really is as simple as it's showing there. I select the site, I select the months, and it exports. Sometimes, I think the most I've done recently is like 300,000 keywords for a site for like a month. In Google Search Console, you can get 1,000. I can do a lot more digging and diving into the data through this. Both of these tools are like $99 to $150 a year. If you have a lot of budget, and I just went past it. Supermetrics is a great tool, but it's got a bit more of a budget requirement. This one, there's also a free one out there called Google Analytics for Sheets. You can tie it into your Google, and it does just similar to the other two. For anyone that's worked in Google Sheets, it's just not as fun and as easy as Excel for some larger data sets. There's Google Sheets for Marketers has a number of ones, and one of them includes looking at intent. So there's lots of tools out there, especially the ones that use the API. You can just get a ton more data, especially if you're a larger site. If you have developers that are bored, I would love to talk to you, but also, because no one does. But there's Python and some really, data scientist type tools out there that can really dig in. So if you have a really, really large site, this might be the way to go. It can handle a lot more data. Otherwise, you can look at Power BI, which I like to use for mashing up different data sets. Data Studio also has a lot of different tools to play with. And then InLinks, and this just launched, I forget. I got a preview for this tool like 2 weeks ago, and I think it launched the other day, or it's launching this week, I forget. Sorry, Dixon, he's the person way up in the corner. But InLinks, inlinks.net, and there was a link in the last slide, just added to their tool while you're writing. You can drop your content in there, and it basically does keyword research for you, and it looks at entities and topics, and it compares you to the other top 10. So there's lots of different writing tools out there. SEMrush has one, Ahrefs has one. I think most of those types of tools have them. This was just a new way to kind of do it, and they just launched it, I think, last week or this week. So validation, because anytime as an SEO I say we need more content, it's always, well, how much content do you need? Writers cost money. So, same with visual content, and all that stuff costs money. Where is that? How much business are we going to get from all this? So, kind of started digging into that validation trends. You talked about it. Using your Google paid search data. So, I was trying to find a good. Don't worry. I didn't include any Michigan State stuff. But so I can quick drink. Is there any quick questions about what I just ran through? Because it was a lot. No questions about keyword research? Everyone got it? All right, shifting gears. So podcasting, because I hate writing. I'm not a bad writer. I'm just not that fast at it. Shameless plug. Last August, we wrapped up our podcast. We might start it again sometime soon. We'll see. But we did 200 episodes. So it was an interesting learning experience of doing 200 episodes over 4 years. We were not guest driven. I think out of the total 200 episodes, 30 to 40 of them had guests. And most of those guests were during series we did. We did 2 different series. One with we went really old school with some people that started doing PPC back when it was 1 penny per bid, and it was an actual auction before Google brought in quality score and 50 other different factors. Someone that used to work with spamming and jamming to the utmost, and some other just interesting people, but we were not guest driven. Most podcasts are guest driven. So I'm just curious, is anyone here podcasting or doing any, yes? No? You're starting one? So one-ish. What's your angle? Have you figured it out?
Yeah, dental marketing.
Dental marketing? Okay. Who does video or live streaming of some sort? So a couple, so a little bit more. So there, you can kind of use some of this stuff for the same thing or reuse it. Who thinks there's a ton of work in podcasting? It's not. I'm late. I won't say I'm lazy. I just like being efficient. We would do very little prep work. It also depends on your topic. We were not script based. We would have ideas and we would throw it together and be like, yeah, we can talk about that for 15 to 25 minutes. And we would one take, run through it. I would usually have 3 to 4 resources, 1 to 2 internal resources that we would drop in throughout it, but that was the most research I had to do. And we would just mention, here's an article about this, here's this. So it depends on what type of podcast you're doing or video, how much research you need to do. And who has no interest in podcast? I'm just curious. Because I will try to convert you into other ways to use that audio. No one? Okay. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Manufacture pumps. So we do a lot of videos on how to do maintenance on the pump. So it's more visual than it is audio. So we just feel like podcasting is probably not for us or for our customers. We could be totally wrong on that, but so that's why we feel like the videos are more effective. But I don't know, maybe there's a combination of both.
Yeah. So the question is, because of their industry, they don't think it is a match. And I think you're correct. I think you can use it in both, because what we did is we would reuse our content. So our podcast, I created kind of what you see for Marketing O'Clock here, and it's just like a single screen, and we would just modify it with, if we had a guest, I would put the guest picture on there, episode number. And for YouTube, I don't think I did all 200 episodes, but I know at least 120, 150 of them have video. So we took our audio file and created a YouTube video out of it. And then I could take that transcript, and let's say when I worked in-house at a payroll company, I could not get my CFO and certain other people to write content. Even if we ghostwrote it for them, there's just nothing. I should have taken our recording stuff in there and just put it in front of them and said, all right, tell me about this, and just ask them questions and let them talk. And then take the transcription, hand it off to a writer and say, here's an interview. So sometimes I look at podcasting and I don't look at it as just, it has to go into this little bucket, go off to Apple, go off to Google, go off to Spotify. But I just look at it as audio, and how can I reuse that audio in 50 different ways? Same thing at a trade show. You could walk around with something that I'll show you and just interview people and start asking them questions. You could have it at your own trade show. You could go to another trade show. Depending on the sound and how loud it is, you might have to find a different spot. But just using that, or testimonials. If people don't want to write in a testimonial, hey, we have a Zoom, we're gonna record it. We can walk you through it. Or take the Zoom and you can record them, and there's a setting in Zoom where you can save each person individually so that you can then edit them if there's noises and different issues. But you can just use that audio then and then create either a video out of it or something else. So I look at audio not just as a podcast itself, but just a different way beyond writing, because I am slow at it. But we could do at least 2, sometimes 3 episodes in an hour, maybe a little over. And so we would sit down for an hour, hour and a half and record all 4 episodes for a month sometimes in 1.5 hours, done. I would have to edit them, but we were pretty good other than his squeaky chair and sometimes his dog barking and, my cat deciding to interrupt me. But normally there was limited editing. So we were producing content, and there's no way me as a single person agency would have produced 200 pieces of content over those 4 years. And I just looked at the metrics a couple weeks ago, we still have people downloading them almost, 7-8 months later. And some of them are downloading other stuff. And I jump into groups, and I can talk about it in a minute, but I use that even now. One of my friends, we had a guest, almost a year since he was on, someone asked him a question on Twitter, and he goes, I could answer it, but here, go listen to Dave's podcast. It's me talking about this exact thing for 45 minutes. And so here's my guest putting it out on Twitter and people listening to it almost a year plus, maybe even 2 years after he recorded it. So there's different ways. I just look at it as, I want to extract the story, I want to extract the content from someone who otherwise wouldn't write it, is how I look at it. So, there's different ways in this post or this slide. Joe Rogan started as a podcast, but I've probably watched more of him on YouTube than I ever listened to him. I catch little snippets here and there. On Podcast is someone we had on before. They're great. Marketing O'Clock, they do a video, but it's really a podcast. It's just Greg and Cypress North up in, he's going to throw stuff at me when I see him. I want to say Buffalo. Buffalo or somewhere upstate New York. They have like a little round table, and they just do it every week, and they talk about Facebook, Google, just digital marketing in general. But it's kind of a round table. You can watch the video, but you don't need the video. So, and if you want to get into baby steps, depending on the type of company you're at, I would say get started with doing a guest somewhere. So podcast guests, radio guest lists, all send out daily emails of people looking for guests on their podcast. I've seen a lot of memes where it's like every day 100 new podcasts are started, and every day 100 new podcasts need guests. Most podcasts are guest driven. So whether you go onto Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups, I've been in both. It's basically Haro. If you've ever signed up for Haro looking for link opportunities, there's so many more link opportunities and so many more opportunities to be a guest on a podcast. It also helps you internally vet, practice, build links, build the confidence of someone internally who doesn't think they can do it. Or just, if they don't want to commit to it and they're like, it's too much time, it's too much effort. No, just go on the show for 30 minutes. It's a lot quicker than having them write something or answer you in for Haro or something else. And as someone who just the other day had 3 people ping me saying, I just listened to your podcast. I want to be, here's a great, my boss would be a great guest. I'm like, we haven't podcasted in 7 months right now. How did you listen to my podcast? Did you listen to the last one where it says, thank you all of our listeners, thank you all of our guests? Clearly not. People still do this, and they're like, here's our one sheet. They give me no reason to be on the show. If you are going to pitch someone, please explain what you're going to bring, how you're going to bring it, why they should have you, how you're going to help their audience. Listen to a couple of their shows. Try to understand what their audience is. Scott Stratton, and his wife is the one we had on our show, talked about pitching services. I've probably blocked a lot of them because they're just really bad at pitching. Or I've told some of them, fill out this form on our site. If we ever have a need for that topic, we go through that list of people if we don't know someone, and we reach out to people. But there's so many wrong ways. Elmer, who's speaking tomorrow afternoon, actually, and I had to cut down the slides for time. Actually, I use his email as the best way to do it. He has a high school buddy that he randomly met up with a couple of years ago, found out that he's not a monopoly, but he's a lawyer and antitrust. And he was like, he would be a great topic to talk about Google and all this stuff. We had him on twice. Some of the best episodes we ever did were those two. And it's just because he actually was like, here's someone that should be on the show. Here's why. Here's what they bring. I was like, oh, yes, please. So that was a great episodes. And oh, look, speaking of referencing your own topics, we actually did a podcast because it's way easier than writing it. And you can read the transcript, you can watch the video about how to be a guest on a podcast and how to pitch. So again, using our own content. So same thing, why a podcast? It was kind of like, because we hate to write. Think about what you're gonna do. Think about what the goals are. There are lots and lots of podcasts out there. You do need to make it stand out. You do need to market it. My favorite thing is that people love content marketing, but they hate to market their content marketing, if that makes sense. Here, we did this thing. Let's put it on the website. Hopefully someone finds it. Oh, look at this infographic. Let's put it on the website. Well, how much money are we gonna spend on advertising it? What? We're not gonna market it. It's content marketing. No, you have to market your content marketing, just like you have to market your podcast. So yeah, what's gonna bring in listeners? How are you gonna market? How long will your episodes be? We looked at ours and said, how long would we want to listen to ourselves ramble about a topic? And when would be the right amount of time? And for us, we were like 15 to 18 minutes, 20 or so minutes. It's a normal commute. People run on the treadmill. It was like a nice kind of 20 minutes. We can talk about it. We had a very small intro. We didn't BS a lot. We didn't talk about, oh, hey, how was your weekend for 5 minutes? I've listened to some of those podcasts where, no, people want to hear, they want to learn something. They want to get to this. They listen for this. They didn't listen to here. And if they are, then great. Then talk about that stuff. That should be your podcast. But for us, it was 15, 20 minutes, and we could cover a topic because our goal was, just like one slide is supposed to be one topic, our goal was one podcast episode, one topic, try to cover as much as we could. And if it's too much, then hey, we'll do another episode and it'll be deeper diving into that. Please, please, please have a website if you do have a podcast. Whether it's a category section on your site that's optimized, don't just use a Podbean, don't just use a third-party website yourself. From a link building standpoint, SEO standpoint, end of life for your podcast, if you stop paying certain services, they only show so many. You want to own as much as you can from it and leverage as much as you can. So please, please, please set up your own website for it. It's also good for rankings. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Mark Rohrer. He talked about the Super Mario effect at one point, and so we did an episode about it. And I just thought it was funny that management styles and the Super Mario effect, our podcast actually ranked #1 over his video that we referenced and talked about. Like, that was the video that I watched, and you can even tell I clicked on it at one point, that gave me the idea for that podcast. And we actually outranked it because Google wanted to show our page and our transcript, and then it showed him, and then down the page, it actually showed our episode too. So I think the site still ranks quite well for it. Google does show podcasts. So you can create a video out of this and have an opportunity, because YouTube is like, I forget the most recent numbers, but of the videos that Google shows, it's like 95% will be from YouTube. If you have a video on the topic, to your manufacturing point question, kind of angle, if there's a how-to or reviews, depending on the keyword, sometimes there can be video content that'll show up. It's a lot easier to rank that video content than it would be otherwise. And then you can even take your podcast, and sometimes you can even get both of them to rank. And Google will also rank podcasts. So you could almost have an image, a normal link, a video, and a podcast all in the same one. I'm all about owning as much of that shelf space as possible. I don't care which, in theory, I want them to go to the website, but if nothing else, I look at it from an SEO standpoint of trying to get our brand and our client as many spots as I possibly can, as many opportunities as I can for Google to pick me and put me on that page. And then, just when you do a search for our podcast, it would just show, the podcast down below. It would show all about us. Also, from a ORM standpoint, if you do a search for my name, every conference I've ever spoken at, my podcasts I've been a guest at, Same thing if you have a spokesperson internally and they can be with your brand and their name at every place. Again, you can have more opportunities for them to tell the story, for them to control more space. Everyone with the name Dave Rohrer probably hates me. I'm sorry, because I show up for like 80% of them. So as far as tools, PowerPress is a great tool if you're looking. I personally use Seriously Simple. They've got a stats, speakers. They've got a standalone speaker page. Some of my friends and some of our people that have joined us, actually, I rank really well for their names now. I don't know if they like it or not, but I rank really well for a lot of our guest names. And their podcasting setup is really simple, but so is the other one. It just depends on what works with your setup and your website. For hosting, we actually, until you get to a certain point, most web hosts, I'll say most web hosts might not kick you off. We were doing hundreds and sometimes thousands of downloads a day. We got throttled every so often, but not enough where I moved us off our own hosting. But there are a number of solutions for hosting the actual MP3 files, depending on how much. So if you're looking at budget and just trying to get it out there, you don't have to go crazy with setups. You don't have to go crazy with hosting. I used a lot of Google Forms. So if you wanted to be a guest on our site and those types of things, it saved me a lot of time. I don't save emails. And it was also interesting just seeing how many people followed those directions. You want to be a guest? Here's a form. And then it dropped it into a Google Sheet that I could always search. Like, there's no way I'm searching my emails. All thousands that are not open, are still open. On site, I don't know. I personally have not used these, but there are a number of solutions depending on your budget if you're on site or in person and need a mobile kind of setup on the go. Desktop, Skype is great, but it has limitations. If your guests or your co-hosts have bad internet, you can't quite get the same type of control you get with other systems. Ecamm and Pamela and some other ones. I've also used just voice recorders for some little project I'm looking at, and it's just me talking into the voice recorder for 3 to 5 minutes for something I'm looking to launch. We'll see if I ever do. For just quick little tidbits. There's a lot of VoIP services, which honestly I would say is the route to go, especially if you don't have everyone in the same room. We've used Zencastr in the past. We've tried Zoom, TriCast, so tryca.st is the one we are most recently using. It's like $10 a month. We had 10 hours of recording time, which was plenty for most people. Offline editing, I am a Windows person, so it depends on if you're Mac, you could probably want to use GarageBand, Audacity, they're both free, they're both simple to use. My co-host had never edited a podcast, and I made him do it, and he used GarageBand for the first time ever, and you honestly couldn't tell if he edited or I edited it. Luckily, we didn't have a lot of editing, but I actually told him, I said, from start to finish, you have to post this, you have to edit this, you have to do all of the stuff that I've done for the last 80 or whatever it was, just so we could talk about how it is so easy. And he's a photographer, and he's somewhat handy. And he was like, I've never used any of this type of stuff. And he's like, yeah, it was easy. So it's not, you can go crazy with it, but you don't have to. We actually did, I did a really deep dive into transcription services at one point, and it's still active and it's still relevant, and it's on our site. But the winner was the one we used because I was just trying to figure out, one, if it was the best solution, was Descript. So you can take any audio file, whether you have one speaker or two, and I actually had some account managers using otter.ai, which is another one I looked at, record our client calls with their permission, and then drop it in there so that she could then search through our hour and a half, sometimes 30-minute client calls to see what she missed. And so she would just use a simple thing. So again, going back to yes, it's podcasting I'm kind of talking about, but there's so many different ways to use that audio file and to slice and dice it into different things. Mike, we just both used the simple Yeti. I think I got a deal on it one day for like during Cyber Monday or Black Friday or something. You can use your computer mic. Just make sure you've got headphones on. The biggest thing I ever ran into is guests that would just use their mic and not headphones. And then I would hear us talking and everything else. And it was just, those were my editing nightmares. Probably why I also didn't want a lot of guests. Headphones, I used, I probably have in my bag, like $15 Sony, like cheap 10-year-old things. You can use anything you want. You don't have to use anything. I think, yeah, my co-host used his earbuds from his iPhone because he had a Mac. So getting it out there, we started accounts for everything. We treated it as its own brand, its own entity. You should as well. If you want to tie it into your own and start there, go ahead. But since it was 2 agencies kind of with one own brand, for us, it made sense. Look at what you want to do, what makes sense for you. Stickers were honestly the weirdest, easiest thing that we used to promote. My co-host traveled a lot for speaking at conferences, and then he would also just travel just in general. He always had stickers on him, and he would always just take pictures of where he was at and we would just use that as different types of content to mix in with stuff. We would use it in slides. We would use it in our Instagram. We would use it he would tweet it out and say, hey, I think this was in Amsterdam, or it was in Europe somewhere for something. And he just started taking photos, and it was just something different to kind of mix in. Every guest we had, the one upside to having guests on is they do promote it. They do post it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. They promote themselves and you. That is the one good upside to having guests. iTunes, Spotify, there's lots of different directions. It's gotten very much easier than it was 4 or 5 years ago. There's also lots of different apps out there. So market your content marketing. We guest posted when we first started. We reached out to a couple of our friends. We talked about Authority Labs and validating your podcasting ideas, kind of walking through that. Part of this deck was used for the guide that is on SEMrush to walk you through. My co-host actually wrote it, which is kind of funny because we tried to avoid writing, and then he wrote a 4,000 word article about how to podcast. But it was just reusing content. And it also was talking about our podcast. So I don't know if anyone knows who Bert is. He's also known as the Machine. No, one person. He's a comedian. He did go to Florida State, bless his soul, I think for 8 years. But the best advice that I've kind of seen about, and you could almost apply this to most things, is just do it. Especially for podcasting. Don't tell anyone about it. Figure it out, especially for podcasting. Is it solo? Do you need guests? Do you need a set co-host that just is the question person, and you just bring in people from the company, that you bring in other people? Do you need a color person to kind of jump in here and there every so often? What makes sense for your business, your hobbies, your brand? Do 10 or 20. Our first 5 we recorded in one time, and they sucked. We had sound issues. We had all sorts of issues. We recorded a couple. I went to edit them. We learned from it. We did 4 more. They sucked, but they sucked less. And we started getting better. We started trying different systems. Just let it suck and find where you go. Even if you don't publish those, just internally, just do a couple, try it. And then see what happens. Bert, during this interview, talks about how some of his other comedian friends came out with their first big episode, and it sucked, and they were out promoting it. And he's like, but it sucked. It's it was just a hunk of junk with bad sound and bad quality, and you couldn't hear parts of it, and there's just all sorts of technical issues. He's like, why would they post it? Just because they did it, you don't have to post it. You don't have to promote it. So a bit about me. I am a reformed web developer. I've spent time in-house. I've spent time at agencies. I now have my own little agency. I've worked with startups, really, really small startups up until Fortune 10, Fortune 50, a couple of them there. Worked in PPC, SEO, kind of all over the place. That is the boss in our house. He's now 8. He'll be 9 in 2 weeks or so. Every company I've worked for has been bought. So one day, maybe my agency will be bought. I don't know. But oddly, every company I've worked for has been bought. So if you want your company to go IPO and be bought or something, you should hire me. And if you're ever looking for me, I'm all over, usually at conferences or maybe on Twitter sometimes, depending on the day. So any questions?
You said don't promote your first podcast at first. Is that because there could be kinks?
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, should you promote the first podcast? I would do a couple trial runs, maybe just 5 minutes, say, hey, let's just have some internal people from the marketing team or some team come in. Let's record 2 or 3 with this solution, with this solution. Let's see what works. What do we like? What don't we like? You know, and then take a look at the files too, because sometimes you'll realize that people are sitting too close and the microphones are picking up and you don't have settings right. Or especially if you have a mix of, sometimes you're gonna have people in one place, you're gonna have people in multiple places. What's the best hybrid solution that you can use all the time for consistency? Does that not make sense? So just depending on how many you wanna do. I think we started with Skype and we ran into people dropping and having quality issues and then having to edit and cut and just waiting for them to rejoin. And then realizing that with Skype, you only get one file. So if one person's really quiet and one person's really loud, I can't adjust because there are 2 people in 2 different parts of the country. So we had to work through that. We tried Zoom, we tried different services, and then we started figuring out how long it should be exactly, the solution, software, kinks, you know, as much as we could. And they were like, so yeah, we did some quick demos and then we did our first 4. And honestly, our first 4 sound-wise and everything, we still probably should have crashed and redone. But we were like, we'll get it up. We'll get better. No one's listening yet anyway. Any other questions? Go ahead. I would try to find a really easy layup win and say, and maybe even do it for them. Just say, hey, we want to record something for YouTube. We want to record something for the site, for this one piece of content, for your website for you. Let's just do something. And then they're not a podcast, but then they're just doing a podcast video type thing. And then they can go, well, that wasn't hard. No, it wasn't, was it? Could you do this for other opportunities? And then explain that we get a brand awareness, we can get links from an SEO standpoint, from a branding standpoint, from all of the different pros versus them not wanting to do it. So the question is really about metrics and what makes success. There is, and I forget the site. I can look it up. For our podcast, there's a couple sites out there, and the one we use just got bought. Everything's getting bought by Spotify. But it's a free service. The Get Stats also had some, but depending on your hosting provider, you can also then get general downloads, but it's not very specific. The tool, there's some tools out there that are for free that if you tie in with Libsyn and some of those hosting providers, they can give you really detailed metrics about male, female, which listeners. You can then also point out how many people in your Google Analytics or your analytics solution, how many people came over But you could also then do that almost for everything, which could be good and bad. You can say, yeah, we also got this, attribution and this mention on this site. Whoop. That means time. We got very few visitors from it too. So was that a waste? We got brand awareness. We got all this other stuff. Yeah, everything has a cost, and it just depends on which metrics and which buttons you can push to try to convince them, and it depends on each person. I think we got one more question, or we got nope, we're done. Oh, okay. Thank you, everyone.